Michele Olivier is a consultant. The topic is how not to suck at interviews. I love that. And just so you know, she knows what she's talking about. She is a 20-year recruitment veteran whose insights on industry trends appear regularly in leading publications like the New York Times, with global expertise and a list of clients that includes the Big Four, big tech, and Fortune 500 companies. She has recruited at all levels, from entry, retail, through executive. As principal consultant with O&H Consulting, she channels her experience into customized resume and career coaching support that helps clients soar above the crowd. So I cannot wait to meet her and hear her. Michele Olivier.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to get to work with you guys. And hopefully it to be of some help to people. So as she said, absolutely, I am and have been a recruiter for 20 some odd years. I am still actively recruiting for stuff. So I will definitely be happy to answer questions about that as well. But yes, so today we're going to talk about how not to suck at interviews. And we'll talk about that in a couple of different ways. So today we're going to go through some general tips, tricks, things to know, talk about some of the stupid questions that they're going to ask you, superstars, what should you do with what would you do, or and know how not to ask them stupid questions. And then there'll be a time at the end for asking me questions. And go nuts, ask me anything you want to know. I'm happy to help. So first of all, my general tips and tricks that I tell everybody. When you're answering interview questions, you want to try to keep your answers short, sharp, and to the point. So about 20 seconds or less is right. If you're talking for more than 20 seconds, it's very unlikely that you're gonna keep their attention. So you want to keep your answer really targeted and then give them the opportunity to direct you for where to go next. Second up, answer the question. About 70% of candidates that I interview, which I have interviewed tens, if not hundreds of thousands of candidates at this point, don't answer the question. They answer a similar question. They answer an adjacent question, but they don't answer the actual question I asked. And that's not because they're lazy. It's because what usually happens is that people are distracted about what they're thinking of next and trying to give me what they think I want to know rather than just answering it. So when you get asked a complex question, begin with the short answer. What do you know about project management? You could probably talk about that if you're a PM for hours. Start with, I've been a technical project manager for 5 years and I have my PMP, and then tell them something else so that you begin with the shortest possible, most direct answer to their question and then expand rather than beginning with the expansion. Number 3, nobody likes interrogations, so make it a dialogue. The difference between an interrogation and a conversation is that in an interrogation, only one party gets to ask questions. The trick here is to ask questions throughout your interview. That 20-second answer, follow it up with, can I tell you more about? What would you like to know more about? I'd love to give you some additional detail on blah. Would that be of interest to you? Let them guide you. And this also then feeds into the fourth point, which is tell them what they want to know, not what you wanted to say. A lot of times when we're preparing for interview, one of the traps that we fall into is we've decided, well, this, and this experience are what make me perfect for this role. And so we have decided that come hell or high water, we're going to tell them about this, and this experience because that is what makes us perfect. Stop. Back up. Let them guide you. Don't try to predetermine for them. Answer their question and then say, can I give you more detail about this? I'd love to also tell you about this example. Would that be of interest to you? And then if they say no, don't be offended. The answer just may mean that no, I got everything I needed. Clearly, you've ticked that box and move on. Don't try to control the content. Let them do it for you. Next up, don't be weird, but do be yourself. What I mean by don't be weird is there is so much terrible advice out there about interviews in particular that people tell you, oh, you should always ask this, you should always do that, blah, 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 blah. Don't be yourself. Don't use canned interview questions. Don't use canned responses. Do something that actually sounds and feels like you. And that applies as well to post interview behavior. People always ask me, should I send a thank you note? Honestly, in 2021, almost nobody gives a monkeys about that kind of stuff. When you leave an interview, you should always send an email to whoever arranged the interview to let them know if you're still interested in the position and broadly how you think it went. Should you send individual thank you notes to every member of the team? Probably not. If you're just that person, like that's how you roll, you're a big thinker, great, go nuts. Otherwise, probably not. Just don't be weird, don't be awkward about things, but do be true to yourself. Next up, always tell the very best truth. What I mean by that is I never, ever, ever, ever encourage people to lie or even to really bend the truth in an interview. Just be honest. But that doesn't mean full disclosure. It's a very different statement. This is more like a first date level of honesty. You don't want to not tell the truth, but at the same time, we don't have to tell them like all of the details about, I don't do laundry. I'm not going to do the dishes. I'll never put the toilet seat down. Like, save those for them for find out later. We're going to go with the best version of the truth, but it still needs to be the truth. On things that are sticky for you, if you have or concerns about why'd you leave your last employer is a big one, or any of the others, get some help beforehand to practice what that's going to sound like. Most of the time, the things about that make it sticky is not something that's relevant to them. It's something that's relevant to you because this is your personal life and you're bringing your baggage to that answer. Get somebody to help you clear out all of those things and focus on the facts bits that are most germane to the interviewer. Finally, whatever happens in the interview, own it. I have seen this apply to everything from profuse sweating to saying crazy things. I literally had a candidate once who was so nervous, he told us the wrong name when he was introducing himself. Um, I've had people fart in interviews. I've had people have to run out and go to the bathroom. Just whatever it is, own it. We're all in the same room together. You said something crazy because you got nervous, and then like the little demons in the back of your head were like, oh, tell them this. They'll want to know. Just say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm super nervous to be here today. Can I try that one over again? You're demonstrating humility, you're humanizing yourself, and again, you're being honest. One of the scariest things for any manager ever is people who, when they make a mistake or when something goes wrong, they try to cover it up. You're automatically demonstrating that that's not you just by saying, I'm honest or I said something dumb. Simple as that. And then finally, it's okay to not know. People in interviews, I have seen them go to such extreme length to avoid saying, I don't know the answer to that question. Stop it. You are not Google. You do not know all the things. Quit trying to pretend that you are. For those of you in a technical sector, that's especially true. A lot of times, employers are going to be asking you progressively complex questions, trying to understand the limits of your knowledge. So just own it when you get there and then tell them what you would do to find out. So don't just say, I don't know, shrug and leave it at that. Say, you know what? I don't really know the answer to that. I haven't had that come up before, but here's what I would do to find the answer. So those are my top basic tips and tricks. So now let's get a little more specific about some of the questions that they're going to ask you. Full disclosure, I genuinely think these are all stupid questions. I genuinely think that employers should stop asking them. Tell me about yourself. I particularly hate because it's not even a question. What people get wrong about this is we say, tell me about yourself. And then they start reading their resume to me. Stop it. This question, you don't even know what they're trying to get. Some employers say this just as a icebreaker. How's it going? Who are you?
It appears she is frozen. She might have to go out and come back in.
What's your greatest weakness? Please, God, don't tell them that you're a perfectionist. Instead, you want to tell them something that's true about you. You want to impact what that means to the business, and then you want to tell them what you do to fix it. Similarly, with your greatest strength, tell them something that's true about you, something what that impact is to the business and what you do to help grow that strength. Why do you want this job? You can answer that in one of three ways. You can either focus on what something about the actual job duties that you're excited about. You can focus on what the opportunity represents to you from a career perspective. Or thirdly, you can focus on something about the actual organization that you're excited about working with. Um, and then where do you see yourself in 5 years? Just tell them the truth. The worst for this is when people are like, in your chair, or, oh, I hope that I am still working for XYZ Corp because I want to work here forever because you are so amazing. Stop. It's 2021. That's not reality based. Tell them the truth. If the answer is, I don't know, then say, you know what? I'm not really sure. One of the things I'm excited about this position is it would give me the opportunity to learn more about this sector so I can get a better idea of what would come next for me. Don't be afraid to say I don't know, but also don't feel the need to make something up. Just tell the best version of the truth. I'm sure people will have questions about some of those. But like I said, if you can either pop them in the chat, and I'm sure that Shannon will be delighted to interrupt me and let me know, or we can handle it when we get to the ask me anything part.
Can I interrupt you for just a minute? You
Of course.
froze. You
Oh no.
froze right at the very end of tell me about yourself. I mean, we got all the rest of the questions, but
Okay.
you were saying, I hate it because it's not even a real question.
Yeah.
And then what we didn't get was your advice on answering that particular question.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah. So we answer that question with a question. So when somebody says, "Tell me about yourself," you're going to turn around. What you don't want to do is just read your resume at them, that sort of thing. Instead, what we want to do is turn around and ask them, what do they mean by that? Do they mean personally? Sometimes they just mean they're trying to make small talk and get to know you. Sometimes they mean professionally. And then that you would answer that the same way as why do you want this job? Because that's what they're trying to get at. If they say personally, give them three short facts about yourself that you wouldn't care who knew, that are in some way somebody would have something to say about that. So I tend to go with I lived in England for 10 and a half years. So sometimes my accent gets a little dodgy. I speak fluent Russian, and my favorite flavor of ice cream is Rocky Road. Somebody has something to say about all three of those things. So those kind of really quick, simple facts about you is to tell me about yourself, not life story, nothing sort of bigger than that. Thank you so much for letting me know that that happened. Sorry, I did warn you about my tech. All right. So superstars. You may have already heard about the STAR technique. This is what you do for what we call behavioral interview questions. So anytime somebody asks you, give me an example of a time when, this is how you answer that. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So the situation is going to be a very broad description of where you were, like super broad. Task is giving the more fine detail for this particular instance. Action is what did you do? So this needs to be in the first person. And then the result was what happened as a result of your action. You get one sentence per letter. This one also should be about 20 seconds or less. And if you do it right, you should have the actual word could be used at the beginning of each of those sentences. Stars are really great because you know really before you go to an interview the kind of list of examples of things they're probably going to ask you for, and you can pre-plan these out and even have them. These days everything is Zoom. So you could have the wall behind your computer covered in notes and post-its and that sort of thing with some details about the stars that you're going to answer to help trigger your memory. They will have no idea. So really helpful. Here's what that sounds like. So if one of the stars that you should always have prepared is give me an example of a time that you had to work with a difficult team member and pull that around. And so the example I have is the situation occurred when I was working as a recruiter at Facebook. I was tasked with taking over recruitment for a division from an existing staff member who really resented the intrusion. So the approach I took was to bring her in as a trusted advisor whom I was there to support. And the result was that she helped grease the wheels and to make the transition a real success. And then I would follow that up with, can I tell you more that about that division and that transition and what was related to that? And they may say, nope, we're good. I got everything I needed. Or you could say, is there some additional information I can provide? I feel like it was such a big story in my life. I'd love to tell you more, but I also don't want to bore you with all of my details. Usually what people get wrong on this is that the from a candidate perspective, you have the most investment in situation and task. As an employer, I don't really care about those. I care about action and result. So we have this split, but people tend to, especially on the task one, that's where they get long-winded and rambly, etc. Trust me, we care so much less about those details than you think we do. What we really care about in all of this is what did you, the candidate, what did you do? What were your actions? And then what came up as a result of those? Next up, what do you do? What should you do with the what would you do questions? This is one that we get a lot about, like testing, especially for more senior level roles. What would you do in this situation? Talk me through your approach to what have you. Um, the way that you do it, the way that you handle these questions is exactly what this says. Question everything. Start with fact gathering. If the question they're asking you is, how would you handle it if a client approached you with this problem? Great. Stop, back up, and start to answer and ask them all of the questions around that. Great. What kind of client? What's our goal with this client? What's the scope of our work with this client? And kind of build out from there. As you get all of the facts for each tier, it'll be obvious it should be obvious where you would go next. And if it's not, like we said earlier, you admit that. You would say, wow, well, I don't really know what your company's policy is about how you would handle this. So I would probably go to my manager and ask the following questions. Or I don't know about this thing over here. So I would start by doing some research there and move on from there. Lead in this one with questions. I actually know employers who use these almost as a trick question that they've said, okay, you have for support positions in particular, where they've said, you get a call that somebody's computer isn't working, talk me through how you would handle it. And the real answer was that the computer wasn't plugged in, which you should be able to assess in just a couple minutes if you do this and start by asking questions. So a lot of times we get nervous in interview and feel like we have to take the information that they've given us prima facie and just take that and go, that's on us, not on that if we can't show weakness by asking questions, etc. Nah, screw that. Ask them your questions. Ask them, clarify everything. They've created this scenario. A great person begins by getting all of the information and data that they need. I always say that I was a lifeguard for a long time. And when you're going through like first aid certification, they tell you the first thing you do is you survey the scene, right? Like before you can check on the person, you have to make sure the scene itself is safe. Exact same thing in an interview. Before you jump in with your strategy for how you would handle something, your first step is to actually define what that looks like and what the parameters are. Not stupid questions to ask them. And yes, in this case, there are stupid questions. Here's what I would say. At the end of every interview, they say to you, "And what questions do you have for us today?" I don't have any, not a good choice. You should always go in with at least 3 to 4 questions prepared. If during the course of the interview they answer those, which happens all the time, when they say, "Did you have any questions for us?" You say, "Ugh, you know what? I did. I was going to ask you, boom, 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 but you've already covered all that. So I'm good for now. What questions do you have for me?" When you're designing those questions, first of all, make sure you really care about the answer. For some reason, people feel the need to ask questions about stuff that they have a mild passing curiosity in. Why? Why would you do that? Ask something that you actually care about the answer to that. And also, for each interview stage, you want to keep your questions focused on what you need to know to decide if you want to proceed to the next round. People often get out in the weeds asking specifics. Techs, you guys are the worst for this. Well, what specific language do you use to do this? And what is your procedure and protocol around that? Stop. Stop. Why do you care? If you don't get this job, the answer is you don't care. So, what you really need to know is anything that is going to help determine whether or not you want to move to the next round. Round one interviews have a very different level of information you need to know if you want to go to round two than final interviews as to whether or not you want to accept that job. That's where you want to keep your questions. Also, match those questions to the audience. I'm a tech recruiter. Tech people ask me ridiculously complex technical questions. You know what? I don't know. I don't know the answer. That's not my wheelhouse. Ask HR people questions about HR, company, policies, culture, etc. Ask technical people questions about technology. Make sure that your questions are appropriate and relevant. I don't know why, but there is some advice out there that says that recruiters are super impressed if you ask us things that stump us. We're not. That's You're not helping your cause. It's not making me feel like you're a stronger candidate because you used a bunch of acronyms and words that I don't really know what those mean. Did nothing for me other than make me question how great your communication skills really are because it didn't occur to you that I would not know those things. So instead, keep your questions relevant and specific to the group, to the individual that you're talking to. Save those technical questions for when you're talking to a technical person. And at the same time, save the more general questions for when you're talking to one of the generalists in the process. The last one is, and people always ask, well, how do I handle when they ask me about money? You don't, because you ask them at the beginning. Very first conversation you ever have about this role, you ask, what is the pay for this role? Absolutely. You should never accept a full interview, be involved in a process, etc., where you do not know what the pay is for this role. Because why are you going to waste your time? If you know that you need 95K and they think that they're going to pay 55K, this is not going to happen, friends. So save yourself and save them a lot of time, aggro, and emotional heartache by just saying, okay, this is not the right role for me. Very first conversation you have with them, one of the very first questions you should ask, because it also tells you a lot about the position itself. The level of expectation and responsibility that comes with a 55K role is very different from the one that comes from a 95K role. I am going to expect a different level of work. There's going to be more team leading responsibilities, more all kinds of other duties with that higher level role. So I need to know where you fall. And by asking that question, it actually helps answer that and gives you more details on those things. All right. Your questions for me.
I was told by another recruiter in another Launchpad meeting to never ask about salary and to not give an answer for it if they did.
Ew. Why would you not ask about salary? I'm unclear. Like I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I wouldn't ask about it in the interview. I would ask about it in that initial discovery call that you have with the recruiter. So I personally believe strongly that we should put salaries on every job ad ever, which would then mean that you didn't need to ask. But then once you're engaging with the recruiter, should be one of the first questions. Did they give any reason why that they felt you shouldn't do that?
If I remember correctly, I think it's because they may decide that you're worth less than you're actually worth, and I'd have to look at the meeting. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I didn't know. Yeah, my experience and the experience of all of the recruiters that I know, which is a lot, would be that's poor advice. That ultimately, you're not doing this job for love. This isn't a volunteer thing. This isn't a passion project for you. You're coming to get paid, and you need to make sure that you are going to be paid fairly. I'll give you an example that right now, I have an amazing candidate that that's been through 4 rounds of interviews with the company I'm recruiting for. They love him. He loves them. It's a big love fest, but they didn't share the salary internally with the company, his salary expectations. And so at the very last minute, it may all fall apart because somebody didn't ask the right question internally. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again with folks where that wasn't the problem, where like nobody asked the question of the candidate at the outset. Absolutely, you should lay out what your expectation is. And I will tell you that the trend in the market is so strongly in that direction that if you're unfamiliar, the state of Colorado has recently passed a law that requires that all job ads actually state the pay for the role, because it is considered to be just such an essential part of the process. So I can't speak to what I didn't hear, but I will tell you that every recruiter I know would give you the same advice.
And so if I can speak, well, Michele, from what I understand, it's kind of a flavor of, you make the discovery of the job, you like to get it, you're talking with them. You want to ask them in a way that you're okay with going forward, and talked about money, right? If it's something like you said, well, I need at least 95 for this, and the recruiter comes back and says, yeah, well, that's something that, we can accommodate with you because I've talked with the company, I know it's in that realm, that's good. And if they come up with, well, it's 55,000, then you can save a lot of people a lot of time. But if it's, even for lower, if you say, if the response is something that you're okay with, they're not going to try to mess around with you anyways, then you can at least go forward confidently and put your best foot forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's also nothing wrong with giving a range. So saying, I'm looking for something in this range is a perfectly acceptable way to handle it as well. Like, I'm not suggesting that you try to negotiate before you've gone through. Just make sure that everybody's in the ballpark, and so that way you can know that you're not wasting your time and theirs.
Instead of four interviews later, and then it all falls through and everybody's sweating it out and cursing under the breath.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than that. Like, why are we at the 11th hour and just finding out we've got a 50K pay gap? What? Like, why? Yeah, I bet he did seem great.
Yeah, it's grueling sometimes, the interview, and then go to the next interview. One guy read, and he pulled out after the 4th interview because they're going to schedule him for 9 interviews, and he wasn't going to do it. So it's a big deal, so good advice, very good advice.
I see a hand raised from Alexander.
Yes. Hi, Michele. Great presentation. I have a couple of questions. what's the best way to approach, questions for them, without scaring them, and especially those where you want to know whether, the culture of the company or the organization or future boss could be potentially toxic.
That
So sometimes,
is
just ask like, why would you leave your company, or what's so unique about your company that that you work for. So what's the best way to approach those type of questions, without scaring them?
I like that how delicately put that was. The like, how do I find out if you're a jerk without saying, "Are you a jerk?" Um, I'm a really big fan of asking what you want to know, and I give my clients like on the like hiring manager side that same advice. Quit trying to orchestrate some complex question scenario about whatever it is. Just whatever you want to know, ask them. So if you want to know, is this a toxic workplace? Find a way to say that politely, which is kind of what you're asking. And what I would say is when you say toxic, start by backtracking in your own mind. When you say toxic workplace, what does that mean? What is it that you're concerned about? Are you worried about work-life balance? Great. So say, what does your organization do to help high achievers maintain a good work-life balance? Are you worried about promotion within? Great. Talk to me about your promotions within. Are you worried about lack of whatever it is? We use really broad terms for things like culture or toxic environment and that sort of thing, when really there's a specific concern behind that. And my recommendation is always look to what the specific is and then find a way to politely ask about that specific for you. Jonna,
Loved it. Thank you so much.
did that answer, Alex? Sorry, Alexander, does that help?
It did, yes.
Okay,
Yes, thank you.
John, I know your mic was on for a sec. Did you have a question?
I have a question. This is Kathy. And the business about asking them what they're going to pay.
Mhm.
They come back and say, well, let me just turn that back on you. What do you have to have? What are you looking for in compensation? And so I think the fear that has been instilled in people is that if they say, well, I need to have at least 95, and the company is willing to pay 180, they're going to say, oh my gosh, this guy will work for, we'd have to pay him 110 and he'd be so happy. That you're giving up if you say I have to have this much and they're willing to pay more. So is that just something where you do research ahead of time so that you don't make that mistake?
So I have multiple responses. First of all, any company that does that is a jerk and they don't deserve top talent. Treating people fairly with pay is a really great way to attract and maintain top talent. Does that mean that there aren't jerks out there? Of course not. There are loads of jerks out there. So it's a valid concern, but the best companies won't do that. And I know a lot that don't. But the second answer, which is a more helpful answer to your question, is that yeah, you do some research beforehand. And the way that rather than saying, I need X number, I would respond with, well, for my research, market for this role should be from here to here. As long as we're talking in that ballpark, that's fine. And as I know a little bit more about the role and where I fit, I'm happy to negotiate within that boundary.
Perfect. Thank you. There's also a question in chat.
Sure.
Somebody had said, how do you smartly answer about your weakness? I know you gave that 3-step answer to weakness. Could you give
An example?
a specific example?
Yeah. So my answer to this question is always that I cannot lie. My face spasms if I try to lie. So I just can't lie. So I am always honest. And what that means to an organization is that when people ask me for feedback, when people ask me, what do I think about things? When the CEO stops by my office and says, hey, Michele, how's it going? I'm going to tell them exactly what the answer is, in my opinion. And sometimes that was not preferred. Sometimes that has negative ramifications. So what I have learned to do is to check before I speak and say, hey, are we just looking for excitement about this project, or are we actually ready for feedback? Or, hey, CEO, are we just saying hi, or are we actually here to have a talk? And then choose my answer accordingly. Those types of answers are great. Other things that people come up with a lot, it might be, you know, I have a tendency to not make good boundaries around my work, and so that can cause me to get burnt out and tired a lot, especially after big projects. So what I have learned to do is to work with my manager to make sure that I have clear lines between work life and home life, and that I am taking appropriate steps to take care of myself, while at the same time making sure that my projects get delivered in a timely manner. So those types of answers, I think, hopefully that those specifics help, but that's how it sounds. Kind of a conversational, this is what it is. This is why that sucks. This is what I do about it.
Perfect. And somebody else had a hand up, but I don't know who it was.
Julie
Oh,
has
did
a
you
hand
see?
up, but John's
Okay.
tried to talk to me twice and gotten interrupted.
I did, and Kathy had actually read my mind. I was working, so I was just typing it into the chat. I was working out the whole thing of, you know, if you ask first, and personally, I like to ask a range. When they throw it back at you, why don't you tell me what you need? I was just trying to figure out the best way to do that, because this is a really, you know, it's a really hard thing. I like to be honest too, and my impulse is to say, oh, you know, I made $100,000 or I made $60,000 or whatever. And it isn't pertinent to what you're going for, really. They're trying to fill the role at the particular industry standard, hopefully, or they're trying to lowball somebody, depending on whether they're jerks or not.
What you're on right now is never any of their damn business,
Yeah.
is my personal take on it. The
Thanks,
answer
that's good.
that what you are looking for and what the market is currently supporting is. And I will tell everybody that the 2021 market is on frickin' fire. We're seeing huge jumps in salary. Signing bonuses are back. I just had a candidate get a $20,000 signing bonus on top of a 30% increase in salary. And this is a 6-figure candidate. So like, that's a big number. And that's pretty normal right now. That was from a small company. We're not even talking like a FANG company with that. So that just be aware that don't be afraid to ask for market, and don't be afraid to kind of stick to your guns on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I went through a round at Amazon recently and didn't get the position, but I didn't really want it. It was more technical than I wanted to do. I want more business. I've done the technical stuff, and they had a very interesting salary structure. They gave me a range, which was acceptable, but they pay a signing bonus, and they pay a signing bonus over 2 years. So it's
golden handcuffs.
Yeah, but then what they're counting on is they've been having a problem with turnover. What they're counting on is they're counting on the equity kicking in after 2 years, and your equity keeping you there. I did ask them about changing the range for COLA going forward. And they said, we don't like to hire anybody at the very top of the range because then we can't give them bumps. And basically they said, oh no, we're never changing the range for the job. And I just thought that was really odd.
We could talk for hours about weird shit that Amazon does in their hiring process. I know those guys well. I love many of them, but like I got a list. If Jeff Bezos ever wants to give me a call, I can fix his stuff.
But no company never changes the range for COLA. So that was just kind of an FYI for anybody out there. And it was a good range. So it was.
They intentionally
People also aren't moving jobs. Sometimes people are moving jobs because they feel like they haven't been given the bump or the raise, or that they've been held down. So your pertinent, your last salary may be lower than you think you deserve, and lower than the value to your previous company too.
Absolutely.
Thanks. That was great. And Kathy, quit reading my mind, please.
All right, Julie, you had your hand up next.
me start from the beginning. Last week, I got a self-paced questionnaire pre-recruiter interview. Now, this is for a corporate executive level position. I interviewed with her yesterday, and the first question right off the bat was where I could be deficient. And she asked in that specific area. But I brought it back later in the conversation about how I could learn to work in that based on my experience in the same other category. And I came back to her, I go, so do you have any concerns on this? And she's like, oh no, you answered my questions. But I was surprised in an interview for somebody right off the bat to come in with kind of a zinger question on deficiencies.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a nice way that doesn't involve 4-letter words to answer this. Just if for people who haven't heard me before, I've been really well behaved. I'm normally a lot more potty mouthed than all this. But yeah, that was a terrible interview strategy. Unfortunately, there is some bad information out there to interviewers as well, that sometimes they say, yeah, catch them off guard. You never know. That's when you really see what they're made of, which is ridiculous. Winning people in, building healthy rapport and a communicative style that is more conversational, we know is the best way to actually get usable information out of an interview. Unfortunately, not everybody got that memo. So we've seen, so when you see these like marathon interviews with like the fangs and that kind of stuff, all of that comes from in the early 2000s, late 90s, stuff came out about stress interviewing techniques, which is that if you put people kind of through a gauntlet, that eventually they crack and you see the real them, you experience what they're like under pressure, which is just total horse wallop. But it has then informed a lot of the interview processes and that sort of thing we see subsequently. I'm not sure why it won't die. I wish it would, but that type of approach, Julie, kind of smacks of that stress interviewing technique. People feel like zingers is a good way to get something from someone, and actually statistical data, like empirical data, tells us it's not. It's actually the worst way to learn anything about somebody, because they go into panic mode and say things that just aren't even reflective of what reality would be. So it sounds like you pulled that back. I would, at an executive level, I would have questions, I guess, further down the line about what does that say about your organizational culture, that you begin engagement with people at the executive level talking about negativity and deficiency, rather than focusing on what they can bring to the organization and sort of meeting of the minds that way.
Yeah, it started out with a real cordial conversation, just personal, get to know you kind of thing. But I was surprised that that was one of the leading questions, and that wasn't fully in the job description.
Yeah, I would. Were there a junior recruiter? Because sometimes when
She's a senior level, and she hires for the corporate executive level.
I'm trying to help them out, Julie, and you're just. I'm thinking, well, maybe this is her first rodeo with an exec. Sometimes when recruiters handle execs for the first time, they freak out and they think that execs expect to be grilled, and they don't understand that, no, nobody wants that. But yeah, I would, I guess for me as an executive going into that, I would have a mild, maybe not red flag, but yellow flag about what does that imply about their culture.
Okay, thank you. This has been very helpful.
Good. Todd, you were next.
Hi, Michele. Thanks for this topic and presentation. I have two questions. One is regarding truthfulness in a job interview that I'm having next Tuesday. It's actually the third interview of the interview process. So I made it to round 3. Whoop. And I'm anticipating some questions. And my second question is going to be a salary question. So on the truthfulness part, to make a long story short, I basically presented myself as somebody that loves the values of the company and wanting to be part of a team, and the work culture was really the thing that I was looking for rather than the job itself. The job honestly isn't that exciting. And the hiring manager that I interviewed with 2 days ago, kind of he kind of hinted that it wasn't the most exciting job. It's just a job. It's a lot of administrative work related in the IT world, but it is a stepping stone job for project management. So I'm anticipating my next interview with the project manager team is she may ask me what is it about this job that excites me, and the truth is it's not. So I have the feeling I know what I just need validation because I know how to answer that question. I'm gonna talk about things about opportunity and things about the company, and I'm going to talk about the cohort and how I love to work with other people, and I need a second home is basically how I said I just want to.
So
second
you
home.
just listed like 9 things that you're going to answer. Don't do that.
Okay.
One thing. Pick one thing. And if you are genuinely exuberant about other things, you can say, wow, there's a lot that I'm excited about with this opportunity. I would say probably the main thing is blah, 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 blah. I'd love to talk. I could wax lyrical all day about the others if you would like me to. And then they'll laugh and you'll laugh, and then they will move the hell on because they didn't. So they just want to make sure that there is some semblance of enthusiasm. So pick one thing that you can genuinely speak to being excited about. And it sounds like for this one, it's really the opportunity it represents. So say that. So say, I've really enjoyed the process and getting to know the team, but I think the thing I'm most excited about is the opportunity to sort of launch my career and learn more about product management. And I know that there's a lot of great opportunities with this organization to grow in that space, and I'm here for it. So let me come and learn. And she'll be like, oh, wow, you're so smart, Todd. That's great. We want that.
Thanks, Michelle.
So then what's your other question about the money?
Again, last week or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, we had a speaker talk about how you don't want to answer the salary question. I got past it, but the phone screening wanted to know my salary range. And in my mind, it's like, don't tell them anything. And that's what I got from this other presenter. Don't tell them anything. And I think the recruiter is actually a little frustrated with me because I wouldn't even give them a range. And this is based on advice. I'm so out of practice in the job role. And I really thought you don't want to underestimate, if they've got a budget, you don't want to tell them because you might be more valuable than whatever number you give them.
I've heard this advice and I've seen exactly what you're talking about happens all the damn time, right? I'll ask some poor guy a question. What's your range? What are you looking for? And they're like, and then I hear, I'm not really comfortable answering that question. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, we're going to be here all goddamn day. I understand you read a Google article or heard somebody tell you not to answer me, buddy. I just want to make sure we're in the damn ballpark. This is not that moment. So that's where I think this whole idea of give them a range, say, hey, my understanding is that market for this is here. As long as we're in that same ballpark, we can worry about details later. Grand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a twist on that. On that. They had all the cards. I said, it's the range you posted. They posted the range on the job description. So whatever the range was fine. Even though she asked me, but they changed it in the middle of the interview process. The recruiter said, I'm so sorry, but we posted it wrong. So now the range is, instead of a base range, they changed it to, the first posting was minimum budget 50, maximum 60. That's my ballpark for this role. Now they change it to base 35 with bonus. The recruiter said that the pay structure is different for this job.
Todd, run.
It's in their hands to give me the bonus every month, which is very common. And I have done that before with a company like 20 years ago. But it's unsettling to know that the max I can make now is now the minimum budget. And I'm going to be thinking, no, originally they had a budget that was larger. and I'm at the bare minimum. Like now it feels unsettling to me that I feel like I could be compensated more, and I want to ask for more. I want to be able to say, I'd like the base to change from 35 to 40 with my bonus option. And I don't know that's going to come up after, if I'm eligible for this job.
You don't want this job, Todd. This is a bad job, Todd. So that is a fundamental shift, not only in price banding, but in how they're thinking about compensation and how they're thinking about the role. And to bring that in with a candidate this far into the process says that there is something else hinky going on in the background that they're not being transparent about. And if they are that far below, there is nothing in Austin that pays $35K that is at a professional level of employment. Like that's just not a thing. So that's
can get
barely
a-
living wage in Austin.
Taco
So-
Deli is paying $15 to $20 an hour. If you work full time, $20 an hour is $40,000 a year. Yeah.
Something's not right.
Let me interrupt for just a minute.
50, 60 is what it
Julie's,
starts
this is,
at.
Todd,
Yeah.
let me just interrupt for a minute.
Sure.
This is Julie's anniversary. We're going to let her out on time. She's already said if you have questions, you can send them to her in LinkedIn. We're going to take Stephanie's question because she had her hand up. And then that's going to be the
Oh, you mean
end.
me, not Julie? Oh, yeah, no, I'm okay. My husband is playing his
Oh,
video
did I
game in the
say
background.
Julie instead
You
of
did.
Michelle?
No,
Oh,
I'm
I'm sorry.
good, Kathy. I appreciate you looking out for me, but I'm okay for a few extra minutes. He's just informed me he's mid-level on his video game. So if y'all can keep me tied
Oh.
up for another 10, 15 minutes,
Okay. I
he's
thought
very
those
happy
rose
man.
petals were going to be getting stale.
Girl, this is no. We've been in this a long time. We got 2 small kids. We are at a hotel in the Domain. It's not like we went anywhere fancy. We just wanted to sleep without small people and dogs waking us up. That's our romantic getaway.
All right.
But
Well, then
still,
you cut it
I
short whenever you
appreciate
need to.
Yeah.
I think Julie had her hand up first.
I thought I answered Julie's thing. She just forgot to take her hand
Oh.
down.
Okay. Is it ever worth it for a mid to senior level position to take a contract position? You know,
Yeah.
like at Microsoft?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Do you want more than yes, just yes?
Yeah. Like why? Because I did work a contract at Microsoft at the beginning of my career, and I'm wondering if that would be advantageous at this point.
So I think that it, especially when you're looking at one of like the really big names like Microsoft, it is helpful to have those names appear on your resume. Those are career maker kind of names. And I think that increasingly, especially with the way that companies are ramping right now in 2021, and especially when you look at like the behemoths, like the big 4, Microsofts, those guys, their internal processes aren't very nimble. And so the way that they what they have to go through to raise an actual role is much more complicated than raising one for a contractor. And so a lot of times it's like they're bringing on a contractor because they can do that today and they need somebody tomorrow. Whereas bringing on a full-time employee is like a 6-month process with a lot of HR hoops that didn't need to be there. And so that's a lot of times why they do that. Frequently, those contracts will be extended. Earlier in his career, my husband worked for Microsoft on an initial 6-month contract. He's nodding, 6-month contract that was then extended out to 18 months, at which
That's
point
the
he might
limit.
as well have been an employee. So yeah, that they're great.
Okay, thank you very much. That was helpful.
No worries. Anything else? Todd, your hand is still raised. Did I not? Is that more questions?
I gotta put my hand. Oh, lower hand. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me just say this was.
I had put a
outs-
question in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
So it was regarding when you are being interviewed for a cell lead or any lead position in your team. So they come up with a question. It's again a behavioral question. If your team members come up with some conflict, how are you going to handle it, or what steps you're going to take to resolve it?
So there's two different ways. So you said it was behavioral question. So the behavioral question for that would be, tell me about a time where you had to negotiate conflict between two members of staff. Um, an opportunity to demonstrate your approach would be, how would you handle it if? And so if they say to you, how would you handle it if you had two members of staff who had a difficulty, you're going to start with, like I said, in this one, asking all the questions. Great. Are they both my direct reports? What's their seniority? Do we know the basis of it? What's our policies around this? You have 9,000 questions before you can say anything. And in the process of getting those questions answered, should become obvious what the next step is. Does that help at all, Vijay? Does it give you
No,
that?
no.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess in general, my answer would be that good coaching says that you intervene minimally and give them the opportunity for growth and engagement. But you want to answer that within the very clear context of the organization and what their goals are. So start by asking questions that are pertinent to what the conflict is regarding, what the setup is, because the way that the dynamics between the two members of staff work is going to inform how you as a manager would handle it. If one is much more senior than the other and they are using that seniority to make things difficult, whatever along those lines, that all of those different dynamics play into how you would answer that as a manager. So you're going to start by asking those foundational questions. If they're asking for an example of a time that this has already happened, then that's when you're going to use the STAR technique, and you can have that pre-planned. I would always recommend the STARs that I always tell people to have pre-planned are a time that you went above and beyond, a time that you had to manage somebody that was not a direct report, or get results from somebody who was not a direct report, a time that you had to handle conflict in the work situation, and a time that you failed. And so those should always be planned as STARs for that. And that is just, like I said, think of a time that literally that happened, and then come up with a STAR around that.